There is a silence that is louder than any sound. It is the silence that follows the shattering of a dream, a quiet so profound it seems to swallow the very air from a room. I stood in that silence, in the cavernous office of Mr. Alastair Haverford, and felt the architecture of my future crumble into dust around me. The air was frigid, a carefully engineered climate designed to remind supplicants of their temporary and insignificant nature. The scent of lemon, polish, and expensive leather was an assault, a perfume of a world that had just formally rejected my application for entry. My blazer, a $3 treasure meticulously excavated from the crowded racks of St. Vincent's thrift store, felt impossibly thin, a pathetic shield against the glacial disdain emanating from the man behind the obsidian desk. I had pressed it with a desperate care that morning, my mother's hands, still bearing the faint, metallic scent of the diner grill and the weary ache of her double shift, smoothing the lapels with a love that was now a continent away. He did not look at me, not in the way one human being regards another. His gaze, a pale, Arctic blue, was a scanning laser, cataloging my flaws. It came to rest on the microscopic fraying at the cuff of my sleeve, a tiny testament to a life of careful budgeting and mend and make do. To Alastair Haverford, this was not a sign of resilience. It was a crack in the pristine facade of his empire, and he was an architect who tolerated no imperfections. Mr. Haverford, without looking up, his voice a low, dismissive rumble that seemed to vibrate through the polished floor, said, "Elara, we need to discuss the concept of fit." The word hung between us, sterile and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Fit. It was a corporate incantation, a velvet-gloved fist that had ended countless careers in this very room. I felt my heart, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of my ribs, beat a wild, panicked rhythm against my bones. I thought of the Project Chimera report, a comprehensive, data-drunk masterpiece that lay in my bag like a stillborn child. It was a plan that would streamline the company's bloated operations, saving nearly $500,000 annually. I had presented it to him a week prior, my voice a fragile vessel for my soaring ideas. He had taken the folder, his expression as revealing as stone, and uttered the words, "I'll see if there's any merit to this." Mr. Haverford finally lifting his eyes to mine, their coldness a physical shock. Our image is our most valuable currency. It is the lens through which clients and partners view our entire operation. They make swift and irrevocable assumptions. He paused, letting the weight of his implications settle. That vehicle you persist in parking in the executive lot, for instance, it creates a certain dissonance, a visual static. It whispers struggle. He let the word struggle hang in the air, a foul odor. And Haverford Innovations, Elara, does not whisper struggle. We roar success. Each word was a precise, surgical incision, expertly administered. He wasn't critiquing my performance reviews, which were flawless. He was annihilating my very essence. He was firing me for the crime of my poverty, for the audacity of trying to ascend to his gilded world without the requisite pedigree. The countless late nights I'd spent hunched over my laptop, the skipped meals to afford the monthly bus pass, the quiet, gut-clenching desperation of checking my bank balance before buying a loaf of bread, all of it was reduced to a single, damning whisper. The report in my bag felt like a monument to my own naivete, a tombstone for my ambition. He slid a single sheet of paper across the vast, dark expanse of the desk. The severance offer was pitiful, a final, calculated insult. Mr. Haverford, his tone one of profound, almost theatrical boredom. HR has the details. I'll need you to clean out your desk immediately. Security will see you out. The walk back to my cubicle was a death march through a gauntlet of averted gazes and pitying glances that felt like physical blows. My hands trembled as I shoved my meager possessions. A spare sweater for the overzealous air conditioning, a chipped ceramic mug that read "World's Best Daughter," a faded photograph of my mother and me smiling in a sun that seemed a lifetime away, into a cardboard box that felt like a coffin for my dreams. The security guard, a man named Carl whom I'd always greeted with a smile, stood with a stoic, embarrassed expression, his presence a final, branding mark of my shame. As the heavy, silent glass doors of the lobby slid shut behind me, sealing me out of the only future I had dared to envision, the cold, damp spring air hit my face like a slap from reality itself. The towering, arrogant edifice of Haverford Innovations loomed above me, a monolith to everything I was not, and in that moment believed I could never be. The rage came then, a hot, blinding tide that threatened to pull me under, to drown me in its bitter, acidic depths. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to shatter the pristine, million-dollar windows. I wanted to force him to see me, to acknowledge the human being he had so casually discarded. But then, cutting through the white-hot fury like a clarion call from the past, came a memory. It was my grandfather, Joe, his face a beautiful, weathered roadmap of a hard-lived life, his hands, calloused and strong, holding my small, smooth ones. Grandpa Joe said, "The world, my Ellie, is filled with people who only see the price tag. They look at a suit and see the thread count, not the character of the man wearing it. They look at a patch of dirt and see only filth. But you, my girl, you remember this. The gold, the real, lasting gold, is always buried in the dirt. Always be a digger, Ellie, not a skimmer." Standing on that cold, unforgiving sidewalk, the damp cardboard box heavy in my arms, the truth of his words finally, devastatingly, bloomed within me. Alistair Haverford was the ultimate skimmer. He saw only the glittering surface, the shiny veneer. And in his monumental arrogance, he had just tossed away a nugget of pure gold, mistaking it for a common, worthless stone. The cold despair in my veins didn't dissipate. It underwent a fundamental transformation. It crystallized. It hardened into a core of absolute, unshakable resolve. The humiliation would not be my epitaph. It would be my genesis. This is not the story of how I was broken. This is the story of how I was forged in the fire of that injustice. And this is the story of how I bought the very forge that tried to melt me down. The first week was a hazy, monochromatic montage of despair. My tiny apartment, once a humble but hopeful sanctuary, felt like a prison cell. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering me, broken only by the relentless, torturous echo of Haverford's words. It whispers struggle. I existed on a bleak diet of simmering anger and the salty, artificial taste of instant noodles, the sharp tang of humiliation my only seasoning. It was on the 7th day, in the depths of a clean, cold fury that had finally burned away the self-pity, that I remembered my grandfather's strongbox. A heavy, rust-streaked metal case he'd pressed into my hands with his final, labored breath. "For when you're truly in the dirt, Ellie," he'd whispered, his eyes holding mine with an unnerving intensity. "When there's nowhere left to look but down, that's where you'll find it." I'd stored it in the back of my closet, a relic from a past I was too busy and ambitious to contemplate. Now, covered in the grime of my shattered present, I dragged it out into the weak light of my single lamp. The lock was stubborn, crusted with time, but my newfound resolve was stronger. With a final, wrenching twist of a screwdriver, it gave way with a metallic shriek of protest. There was no stack of cash, no bearer bonds, no easy escape. That would have been too simple, too unlike the complex, principled man he was. Instead, my fingers brushed against a treasure of a different, far more potent kind. Neat, leather-bound ledgers filled with his elegant, looping script, detailing the glorious rise and the heartbreaking, predatory fall of Joe's mercantile. And beneath them, nestled like a secret, a simple, black-marbled composition notebook. I opened it with a reverence that felt like a prayer. The first page held a single, powerfully scrawled sentence that sent an electric shiver of recognition down my spine. "For the one who is not afraid to dig." The pages that followed were not a diary. They were a manifesto, a war manual for the undervalued and overlooked. It was his life's work, a complete philosophy of investment and life he called value-scouring. It was a meticulous method for perceiving the intrinsic, hidden worth in what the myopic world had carelessly discarded. It was about finding the failing company with a fiercely loyal, local customer base, the obsolete patent with one brilliant, overlooked application, the distressed property sitting directly in the path of inevitable progress. It was about seeing the solid, beautiful skeleton of a thing when everyone else was recoiling from the decaying flesh. And on the very last page, a single, cryptic line written in a different, shakier hand. "If the world makes no sense, if you need a teacher to see the truth, call Silas. He knows." Followed by a phone number that looked decades out of date. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with a surging, terrifying power. This was not an inheritance of wealth. It was an inheritance of a worldview, a lens through which to see a hidden reality. It was a map to a secret world of opportunity, and my grandfather was posthumously trusting me to navigate it. His shovel had been passed. It was time to dig. The number for Sela's rang for what felt like an eternity, each tone a hammer blow against my hope. Just as I was about to surrender, a click, followed by a voice that sounded like gravel grinding underfoot, a voice worn rough by years, and I would soon learn, cynicism. Sela said, "Who is this?" "My name is Elara, Joseph's granddaughter." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end, so complete I thought the line had gone dead. I could almost feel his intense, unseen scrutiny through the static of the connection. He told me to call when I was in the dirt. "Sir, I am in the dirt." And so I told him everything. I poured out the story of my years of struggle, the sheer effort it had taken to get a foot in the door at Haverford, the meticulous, thankless work I had poured into that company, the visceral details of the betrayal, and the specific, cutting words that had wounded me deeper than any blade. I held nothing back. The silence returned, longer this time, more profound, a void I was terrified I had fallen into. "Sela's, Joe said you had his fire. He also worried you were too soft, that the world hadn't hardened you enough. Looks like that bastard Haverford took care of that particular problem for you. Good. Controlled anger is a more reliable fuel than fleeting hope. Meet me. The old industrial wharf, warehouse 7B tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late." Sela's was a man who looked as if he'd been carved from a block of granite and left to weather a century of storms. His office was the cavernous, dust-moated interior of a disused warehouse, a cathedral of forgotten industry filled with teetering stacks of financial reports, yellowed newspapers, and whiteboards covered in a spider's web of complex, interconnecting diagrams and arrows. He became my Yoda, my Mr. Miyagi, a merciless and brilliant mentor who taught me to weaponize my grandfather's philosophical principles into a practical, devastating arsenal. "Sela's, look here, see? Haverford isn't a company, it's a painted whore. All makeup, no substance. The foundation is rotten." He showed me the unvarnished truth. The company was a precarious house of cards, built on vanity metrics and staggering, short-sighted debt. They spent fortunes on lavish corporate retreats and seven-figure executive bonuses while their research and development department, the actual lifeblood of a tech company, was starved into irrelevance. Their flagship product was a technological dinosaur, and they were too arrogant to see the meteor of innovation heading straight for them. "The skimmer," Sela's growled, a predator's smile touching his lips, "is about to be skimmed." Our plan was not a dramatic, frontal assault. It was a silent, patient siege. We would not attack the towering walls of Haverford Innovations. We would tunnel relentlessly underneath them, weakening the ground upon which they stood until the collapse was inevitable. Using the last of my meager savings and a small, discreet loan Sela's arranged from a trusted associate who asked no questions, we founded Ethelred Holdings, a name I chose deliberately for its meaning, noble counsel, a quiet, steadfast rebuke to Haverford's hollow grandeur. For 5 long years, I lived a double life, a ghost of my former self. By day, I worked a menial, soul-crushing data entry job for the steady, humble paycheck it provided. By night, I was the shadow CEO of Ethelred, guided by the spectral presence of my grandfather and the gruff, real-world wisdom of Sela's. We were diggers. We bought a failing logistics software company that Haverford's analysts had publicly scoffed at. We turned it around, streamlined its code, and sold it for a 20-fold profit. We invested in a condemned block of dilapidated warehouses in a neighborhood the city council had secretly earmarked for a massive new transit line. When the public announcement came, the property value exploded, and Ethelred's coffers swelled. Each victory, each successful scour, was a solid brick laid in the formidable foundation of my revenge. Every dollar earned was no longer just currency. It was a bullet, carefully polished and stored for the final confrontation. I learned to read balance sheets like thrilling novels and market analyses like battle plans. The memory of that Tuesday in Haverford's office was no longer a source of pain. It was the nuclear reactor powering my relentless ascent. The call that signaled the beginning of the end came on a rainy afternoon, a bleak and beautiful mirror of the day this entire journey had begun. It was Liam, my one remaining friendly contact from my old life at Haverford, his voice a hushed, excited whisper over the phone. Liam said, "Elara, my God, it's so good to hear your voice. You will not believe the gossip circulating through this place. The vultures are officially circling. The stock is tanking, and the word is some mysterious, deep-pocketed firm, Ethelred Holdings, has been quietly buying up company debt for months. The board is in a full-blown panic. Haverford's been packing his office like a caged animal, screaming at assistance. It's beautiful." I thanked him, my voice calm and measured, but my hand was trembling so violently, I nearly dropped the phone after I ended the call. I looked across the dusty warehouse at Sila's, who was watching me, a slow, grim, and deeply satisfied smile spreading across his weathered face like a crack in stone. The termites had done their invisible, patient work. The foundation was now so weak that the slightest push would bring the entire structure down. It was time for the ghost to become a man. It was time for Ethelred to step out of the shadows. Through a complex, elegant series of shell companies and intermediaries that Sila's had engineered, Ethelred Holdings made a formal, friendly offer to the panicked board of Haverford Innovations. The offer was to buy out the remaining crippling debt and inject substantial capital to save the company, in exchange for a controlling interest and sweeping executive powers. The board, desperate to avoid a public and humiliating collapse, agreed almost instantly to a meeting. The specific request for the principal of Ethelred to meet personally with the executive team was the final, perfect, poetic twist of the knife I would soon plunge into the heart of Alastair Haverford's world. Walking back into the lobby of Haverford Innovations was a surreal experience, like stepping into a recurring nightmare, only this time I was the monster under the bed. The same artificially cool air, the same blindingly gleaming surfaces, the same receptionist with the same professionally painted-on smile. But I was not the same woman who had been escorted out 7 years prior. I was no longer a supplicant. I was a conqueror, clad in a custom-tailored charcoal gray pantsuit that spoke of quiet, immense power, not loud, desperate wealth. I was led not to a waiting area, but directly to the main boardroom. The same room, the same vast expanse of polished mahogany, the same collection of anxious men in their uniform of expensive suits, their faces etched with a mixture of naked anxiety and obsequious hope. And there, at the head of the table, sat Alastair Haverford. He looked older, wearier. The lines on his face were deeper, the carefully styled hair thinner, the smug, unassailable assurance in his eyes now stretched thin over a bedrock of pure, undiluted fear. He rose as I entered, a practiced, ingratiating corporate smile plastered on his lips, ready to greet his corporate savior. "Mr. Haverford, you must be Ms. Ethelred's assistant. A pleasure. We are so profoundly, profoundly grateful for this opportunity to speak with you, to find a path forward." He stopped. The smile froze on his face, then cracked and fell away like shattering porcelain. His eyes, those same cold, assessing eyes that had once reduced me to my clothing, widened in a slow-motion parade of confusion, then dawning, staggering disbelief, and finally gut-wrenching, soul-crushing horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of utter ruin. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply walked with a calm, deliberate pace to the opposite end of the table, the power seat, and stood behind the high-backed leather chair, my hands resting lightly on its crest, claiming it. I responded, "I'm not her assistant, Alastair. I am Ethelred." The silence that followed was absolute, profound, a vacuum that sucked the very air from the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush ivory carpet, a feather land. I saw Liam from the corner of my eye, his hand clamped over his mouth, his shoulders shaking with silent, joyous, vindicated laughter. "Mr. Haverford, this is an outrage, a sick prank. You're that girl Elara from the You Can't Be." I was that girl, the one whose car whispered struggle, the one whose thrift store blazer was an affront to your delicate sensibilities. You were right about one thing, Alastair. Image is everything. You were just looking at the wrong image. You were so obsessed with the surface, the frayed cuffs, the aging cars, that you were utterly blind to the real asset standing right in front of you. You taught me in the most brutal way possible to look deeper, to see the truth beneath the veneer. And when I finally looked deeper at Haverford Innovations, I found a hollow core. I found a company being bled dry by vanity, staggering incompetence, and a leadership style rooted in the most shallow kind of prejudice. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to my lawyer, a severe woman in a sharp black suit who slid a single, devastating document down the immaculate length of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Haverford, a legal judgment upon his entire life's work. Ethelred Holdings now holds a controlling 51% stake in this company's debt and assets. The board of directors, in their wisdom, has already signed off on the acquisition. This document is not a proposal. It is a statement of fact. We are foreclosing. Effective immediately, you are terminated. All your security access has been revoked. You will be escorted from the building. Now. He didn't touch the document. He just stared at it, then back at me, his world, his entire carefully constructed, glossy reality, collapsing into dust and ashes around him. The man who had built his empire on surfaces had finally been broken by what lay, powerful and undeniable, beneath. My first official act as the new majority owner was to dissolve the name Haverford Innovations entirely. It was a tainted brand, a label built on a lie of superiority. We were reborn as Ethelred Core, a name that spoke of central strength and principled counsel. I called an immediate all-hands meeting in the main atrium. Standing on the same raised platform where Haverford had once held his quarterly pep talks, I looked out at the sea of anxious, hopeful, and weary faces, the people who had been my colleagues, who had witnessed my humiliation, who had themselves been cogs in his toxic, soul-grinding machine. 7 years ago, I was fired from this company. I was not fired for the quality of my work, which was exemplary. I was not fired for my ideas, which were innovative and profitable. I was fired for the state of my bank account. I was fired for being poor. That era ends today. The culture of superficial judgment and toxic arrogance ends at this moment. From this day forward, we will be a company judged solely by the power of our ideas and the integrity of our work, not by the price tags on our possessions or the age of our automobiles. I announced the immediate dissolution of the obscene executive bonus structure and the implementation of a radical, company-wide profit-sharing program that would see every single employee, from the janitorial staff to the lead developers, share directly in the success they helped create. I reinstated the R&D budget Haverford had slashed to the bone, declaring innovation our new cornerstone. I publicly promoted Liam to head of operations, a reward for his loyalty and decency. The roar of applause that erupted was not just for the new policies. It was a cathartic release, a collective exhalation of a poison we had all been forced to breathe for far too long. As for Alistair Haverford, I ensured he received the full, precise measure of poetic justice his actions so richly deserved. My lawyers, digging like badgers through the ruins of his financial tenure, uncovered enough questionable expenses, padded reports, and ethical gray areas to legally void his multi-million-dollar golden parachute entirely. He was left with nothing but the personal contents of his desk and the clothes on his back, a mirror of the nothing he had intended to leave me with. On his final, solitary walk of shame, as he carried a single, sad cardboard box, a bitter, perfect echo of my own, towards his precious, low-slung Porsche, he found a city official waiting. The car, illegally and arrogantly parked in a spot that was now, by my specific designation, a dedicated loading zone for my building, was being issued a bright orange violation. And as Haverford stood there, sputtering in protest, a tow truck arrived, its yellow lights flashing, to haul his symbol of success away like the piece of junk it truly was. I watched the entire beautiful scene unfold from the corner office on the top floor, his old office, now stripped of his cold, impersonal art and filled with light and living plants. The rain had finally stopped, and a weak, golden late afternoon sunlight broke through the dissipating clouds, glinting off the city's skyline, setting it ablaze with possibility. The building that had once been a monument to my greatest failure was now the foundation of my lasting legacy. The girl from the thrift store, the one who whispered struggle, had not just bought the company. She had rewritten its destiny, purging it of its sickness and building something stronger, truer, and more resilient in its place. The whispering had stopped, forever silenced. Now only the truth remained, clear and resonant for all to hear. The dirt, at long last, had yielded its gold.